You're listening to the Beyond Measurements and Image podcast, where we build healthier lifestyles, elevate your well-being, and transform lives. Welcome to BMI.
So, you're overweight, maybe obese. What's the difference? Other than some cosmetics and social stigma, does it really matter? How do you compare to everybody else? How did we get into this situation? I am Dr. Drew Crawford, a board-certified gastroenterologist and obesity medicine specialist. On today's episode, we will try to answer these questions and begin to chart a course forward to a better understanding of obesity, both personally and as a societal issue. So what does it mean to be overweight? The Obesity Medicine Association defines obesity as a chronic, relapsing, multifactorial, and neurobehavioral disease, wherein an increase in body fat promotes adipose tissue dysfunction and abnormal fat mass, physical forces resulting in adverse metabolic, biomechanical, and psychosocial health consequences. Now that's a mouthful, and although it's comprehensive, it's hard to discern what that really means. So let's go over that just a little bit. In medical terms, the term chronic often refers to a condition that lasts longer than 3 months. Needless to say, most people that are overweight for years, decades, oftentimes a lifetime, far longer than 3 months. Relapsing? Yes. According to the NIH's meta-analysis of 29 weight loss studies, greater than half of the weight loss was regained in 2 years, and over 80% of weight loss was regained in 5 years. It's reported that the following statement was taken from a prominent weight loss corporation's investor relations pitch. Listen to this. The typical customer enrolls multiple times. Our members historically demonstrate a consistent re-enrollment pattern across many years. Approximately 75% of returning members re-enroll at least one more time in the future, and since 1991, our members have enrolled in an average of 4 separate enrollment cycles. Now, if that's an investment that you're looking into, I highly recommend it. But from a weight loss perspective, it does get to the core of the problem, and that is that people lose weight and then often gain weight back. So we need to try to break that cycle. Multifactorial, that's one of the adjectives they use. So there's so many reasons that overweight and obesity is such a problem worldwide. It ranges from issues with food deserts, to the sugar and big pharma lobby, to a global lack of education, and of course miseducation about obesity. The concept that one of the major beverage companies tried to sell us was that a calorie is just a calorie. This is not true. There's very different calories out there. And then there's the Ansel Keys 7-country study. We'll go over that in more detail. That is the basis of so many of the governmental recommendations, and it's a flawed study. Additional factors is our desire for comfort and our own lack of self-control and self-discipline. Our sedentary lifestyles, our aversion to discomfort, and the desire for instant gratification. This podcast is going to focus on all these issues, but we can't overlook the personal responsibility component as well. So many people will tell us that obesity and overweight, it's not your fault, you're a victim of all these factors. And to a large extent, they're right. This is a judgment-free podcast, but we're not going to mislead you and make you think that you're a helpless victim. Obesity is preventable. Think about this. How many people, including yourself, if given a diagnosis of cancer, would change their diet, change their exercise pattern, change their lifestyle, all at a shot for extra time on this planet? It's interesting, we get a diagnosis of cancer and we go to the extremes. We have major surgeries, we have abdominal surgeries, parts of our organs removed, we have brain surgery. Then we sit in a chair and we have chemicals infused into our veins in the form of chemotherapy to kill those cancer cells. And then oftentimes we're exposed to radiation to kill the cancer cells, all of which are valid treatments, and I am not knocking them at all, but they are extreme. And so we do that for a diagnosis of cancer because we know that cancer can lead to death. We have a clear vision of what we want. And at that time, we know what we want is we want more time on this planet. But why we don't see that with overweight and obesity, that's a big question. Because we do know that we can make dietary modifications and lifestyle modifications and sleep better. We also may need surgery. We also may need pharmaceuticals, right? Those are valid treatment options for obesity. But why, if given the chance to add more years onto your life with any health condition, will you choose the extreme when it's cancer, and yet we just overlook the fact that we can make these relatively simple but not easy lifestyle modifications? So yes, there are big, well-funded industries invested in promoting their products all to the demise of our health. These lead to complex neurologic pathways and neurobehavioral actions that work against you, including the marketing and the addiction from different foods. But this podcast is here to help you see that and to empower you to fight back against all these conspiring forces, including yourself. So let's dive deeper into what it means to be overweight and or obese. Let's start by better defining what is normal weight. Normal weight or ideal body weight is an imperfect measurement, but it's more than just the number on the scale. So your weight on a scale does not completely make up the composition. It just tells you what the entirety of your weight is. Specifically, it doesn't break your weight into fat, muscle mass, skeletal mass, etc. Because of this, many of our measurements are misleading. For example, BMI is a standard measurement that assesses weight and height and standardizes it. However, a very fit, muscular person with very little fat may have a BMI due to the fact that muscle mass is heavier than fat. Conversely, a very small person, elderly person, oftentimes with muscle wasting is what we call sarcopenic, they may have a normal BMI, but have essentially no muscle mass and may be very unhealthy. So although BMI is not perfect, it's still a reasonable measurement for the majority of people. In order to understand overweight, let's first define normal or ideal body weight. So there's multiple formulas constructed to help calculate the ideal body weight, including the Hamway, the Devine, the Robinson, and the Miller. These are all similar, but when I'm visiting with a patient, this is the formula that I like to give them. It's different for males and females, so let me give you the calculation. You take a person's height. Let's say you have a gentleman and he's 6 foot tall. So for the first 5 feet of a gentleman, it's 106 pounds. And then for each additional inch over 5 feet, it's 6 pounds. So if you had a 6 foot tall male, it would be 106 pounds for the first 5 feet. So for the additional 12 inches to get him up to 6 feet, it's 6 pounds per inch. 72 pounds for those additional 12 inches plus the baseline 106 pounds, an ideal body weight of 178 pounds. Now this 178 pounds is plus or minus 10%. So in this case, it'd be about 18 pounds, plus or minus 18 pounds. For a lady, it's very similar, but for the first 5 feet, it's 100 pounds. And then for each additional inch, it's 5 pounds. So for example, if you had a 5'5" female, her ideal body weight would be 100 pounds for the first 5 feet, or 5 pounds for each additional inch, which would be an additional 25 pounds, for a total of 125 pounds. Again, plus or minus 10%. So that's ideal body weight. There's obviously some variations to this, but that's the number that I like to roll out for my patients. And oftentimes, that's a difficult number to get to. That is a big goal because they may be twice that. Doesn't matter where you start, just 5%, because we know if you lose 5%, you substantially decrease your risk of developing cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and arthritis. The other thing is a 5% weight loss goal is very manageable. Let's say you're 260 pounds and you want to lose down to, say, 180. That's an 80-pound weight loss. That's a daunting number. So instead, I recommend breaking that up into small goals and start with a 5% weight loss goal, right? So if you're 260 pounds, 5% is 13 pounds. That's an achievable weight loss goal. So it's meaningful and it's achievable. The purpose of knowing the ideal body weight is to give you an idea of where the end goal is. Not the immediate goal, not where you need to get to right away, but where the end goal is. Back to measuring and kind of figuring out where we're at. Let's talk about the BMI, right? It's a measurement that breaks weight down into multiple categories based on your height and weight relative to one another. So it's done in the metric system, and it's basically your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. Now, you don't have to worry about making that conversion yourself, but you can go on any website. In fact, our website has a link to the CDC where you can put in your height and weight. You can put it in kilograms and meters or centimeters, or you can do pounds and inches, and it will convert it. So once you have that number is then put on a scale. So if you're underweight, your BMI is less than 18.4. Normal weight is a BMI of 18.5 to 24.9. Overweight is 25 to 29.9, and then obese is anything greater than 30. Now, within the category of obese, there's 3 classes, class 1, class 2, and class 3, which then further characterize the BMI as 30 to 34.9 for class 1, 35 to 39.9 for class 2, and greater than 40 for class 3. So the advantage of doing this, or the reason that they separate all this out, is there are different treatment categories that work better or are indicated by the FDA for different weight classes. But in general, overweight is the category of BMI from 25 to 29.9, and obese is everything over 30. The advantage of BMI is that it's widely accepted, and as a general rule, it's accurate for the majority of people, right? Like we said earlier, people that are bodybuilders and have excessive muscle mass, or people that are very small and have no muscle mass that are sarcopenic, the BMI is somewhat misleading. But as a general rule, for the great majority of people, BMI is an excellent marker and one that we'll use. Not to mention it's the namesake of this podcast. What are some other ways to measure body weight and obesity? Well, there's quite a few. So one of them is the waist to hip ratio, right? And the waist to hip ratio serves as a good marker for health and fertility as well as different metabolic conditions. What you do is you measure the waist at the narrowest point of the waist, which is about 3 centimeters or basically just a little over an inch above the belly button. And that's your waist measurement. And then to get the hip measurement, you measure it at the widest part of your butt. And then you divide the waist measurement by the hip measurement. And if that number is greater than 0.9 for men and greater than 0.85 from females, it's considered obese. Waist to hip ratio is a better predictor of cardiovascular disease than BMI. It's actually 3 times more accurate for cardiovascular disease. The problem with waist to hip ratio is that it's slightly subjective in terms of placement of the measuring tape, but it's a good option. It's actually preferred by the World Health Organization. Now, another way to measure obesity is just simply measure your waist circumference. In men, if your waist circumference is greater than 40 inches or 102 centimeters, or if it's greater than 35 inches or 88 centimeters in females, you're obese. Now again, you run into this variation in terms of the site of measurement. The World Health Organization recommends that you get the measurements from the midpoint between the lower rib margin and the top of the hip. And the National Institute of Health recommends you measure it right at the top of the hip, or what we call the iliac crest. Waist circumference is a good predictor of cardiovascular disease as well as type 2 diabetes. So another one that I don't see used a lot is the waist to height ratio. And it's basically where you take your waist circumference and compare it to your height. It should be less than 50%. So your waist circumference should be less than half of how tall you are. So if you're 6 foot tall, that means that your waist circumference should be less than 3 feet around, or 36 inches. So it's a good marker of central adiposity. So that tells us a lot about where our fat's distributed. And if you have a lot of weight in your abdomen, that we know is at risk for cardiovascular disease. The waist circumference to height ratio should be less than 5. You should keep your waist half of your height. And then, of course, there are multiple ways to measure it other than this, right? There's a body fat percentage using calipers. And so you can take these calipers and you can measure it at different parts. There's a 3-point measurement, a 7-point measurement, a 9-point measurement. They're all relatively similar, and it looks like the 3-point gives just about as good a data. And what you do is you use these calipers and you pinch the subcutaneous fat in the 3 spots. And the first spot is basically between your nipple and your shoulder, right in there at the chest, kind of on an angle. And you get that measurement. The other one is about an inch to the left or right of your belly button. You pinch that subcutaneous fat, you get that measurement with these calipers. And the third one is on your thigh, about midway between your groin and the knee. You pinch the subcutaneous fat and you get that measurement. And then you go to an online calculator and you can put those in. You put those in addition to your height and your weight, and it'll produce a body percent fat. Those are pretty good. They're relatively accurate. It's a little cumbersome to measure, and you have to have the calipers, which, you can get calipers anywhere. They're different quality, of course. But there's some subjectivity to what you're grabbing, right? If you just grab a lot of muscle, that number's going to be a lot bigger, and it's going to look like you have more body fat. So there has to be some degree of expertise in grabbing fat versus muscle versus just grabbing a little bit of skin. There's also the issue of varying pressure, right? if you squeeze the calipers too hard or too light, you're going to get a different number. So on the calipers, they actually have, measurements that you can line up, lines that you line up to kind of, equalize the pressure so that it's standardized. But again, it's imperfect. Alternatively, there's different products like the DEXA scan, right? It's kind of the gold standard. It's a fancy scan. It's used oftentimes for bone density testing. People with osteoporosis, osteopenia, they go have these tests and it tells them bone density. But really, it'll also tell you a lot about your body fat percentage, your muscle mass, your lean mass, your skeletal mass. It can really break that down. And it uses x-rays of different energies and are used based on the variable absorption of body composition that can be determined. That's expensive and it's not readily accessible, but that is the gold standard. There's also some bioelectrical impedance analysis. There's one product called an InBody, and you stand on it and it has these sort of hand grips that you grab, and it sends a small electrical current through your body, and it helps determine the different types of body structures, skeleton versus muscle versus fat. There's another product out by Hume Health, and it's sort of an at-home version of this InBody. It's a little bit different. It's probably not quite as sophisticated, and I don't know how it compares in terms of accuracy, but it does the same thing, and it's readily available. I think it's a couple $100, and it's available to everybody. And it gives you good measurements and good breakdown in terms of the different types of skeletal muscle, body fat, water weight, etc. So those are a lot of options that we have to kind of help determine where we stand on the scale, no pun intended, in terms of weight, whether we're underweight, normal weight, overweight, or even obese. And once we kind of know where we stand, then we have a better sense of where to go in terms of what we need to do to affect that number and to get us into a healthier zone. With all these options, each of them have their strengths and weaknesses. But again, I think BMI is the most logical for our purposes. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's easy calculated, it's universally understood, and it'll really serve as a simple way to reference varying degrees of overweight and obesity, which will help us to kind of plug in what different treatment options might be reasonable. Now that we've established a yardstick, let's go back and answer the original question from the beginning of the podcast. Overweight versus obese. What is the difference? Well, the difference is simply that. Underweight, normal, overweight, and obese. It falls into a category. Other than cosmetics and some social stigma, does it matter? It absolutely does matter. The term fat shaming has just recently entered our vernacular, and there's a strong push to normalize overweight and obesity. Although I do agree we should embrace ourselves and we should love ourselves as we are, we should strive for constant self-improvement, including our physical appearance and our well-being. And no, we shouldn't fat shame, but we do need to be honest with ourselves and with each other and our patients regarding this very topic. Why is that? Well, it's not just aesthetics. You can be big and beautiful. The problem is that it's just not healthy, because we know that according to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the risk for type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease all increase with increasing BMI and/or waist circumference. Moreover, with each increasing stratification, the risk from high goes to very high to extremely high. So it's also worth noting that people of normal weight but with increased waist circumference, in other words, they have central adiposity. They may be normal in weight, but that's because their chest and their legs are small and their belly's bigger. So they have normal weight, but they have an increased waist circumference. Those people too have an increased risk for type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. Additionally, patients who are overweight or obese are at increased risk for the following cancers: esophageal, kidney, endometrial, ovarian, colorectal, pancreatic, gallbladder, stomach, liver, breast, thyroid, and multiple myeloma. According to the CDC, in addition to the specific diseases and cancers listed, overweight and obesity are associated with an increased risk of hypercholesterolemia, stroke, gallbladder disease, osteoarthritis, sleep apnea, depression and anxiety, and a low quality of life. So is there a stigma associated with overweight or obesity? Absolutely. More than 40% of U.S. adults report some form of weight stigma. It's the leading cause of bullying among school-age children, and it's often perpetuated most by family members and romantic partners. The term that's grown out of this is sizeism, right? And it's been shown to lead to a decreased quality of life, disordered eating, disordered physical activity, weight gain, avoidance of healthcare, depression and anxiety, substance abuse, and even suicide. We all have our demons and we all have our coping mechanisms. Obese people just don't have the ability to mask their coping mechanisms. So an alcoholic may drink and really be undetected, right? I mean, we've all known people, or probably known people that have known people who have a drinking problem, but they function normally, they maintain their job, they basically seem to maintain their life. Meanwhile, their life is truly out of control behind the scenes, but you don't know that. They're able to mask it, they're able to cover it up. Not all alcoholics, but there are some people, and some people with other substance abuse problems, right? Just the same. They're able to participate in these coping mechanisms, as dangerous as they are and as harmful as they are, but sometimes it just goes unnoticed. Overweight and obese people, oftentimes their coping mechanism for these issues is purely eating. And then they put on the weight and the whole world can see what's going on. Now, I'm not saying that eating is secondary to a problem and that it's a coping mechanism and it's their fault. Absolutely not saying that, but I'm just saying that if that is their coping mechanism, it's out for the world to see. So how do you compare to everybody else in the U.S.? Well, according to the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Disease, 30.7% of adults are overweight. So that's almost 1/3. And a little over 42%, right? 42.4% of adults are obese. And 9.2% of these are severely obese. So lastly, how do we get here? Well, it's multifactorial. There are so many reasons that we're here. A lot of it is high fructose corn syrup, right? A sedentary lifestyle, processed foods, food deserts, which really affect some of our most vulnerable in society. Poor education or no education regarding diet. But oftentimes the education we get is misleading. The food pyramid, the Ansel Keys studies. We'll go into this in another podcast, but poor education, we don't teach our kids and we don't really learn the importance of nutrition, and oftentimes what we learn is inaccurate, funded by big business, big pharma, big food. And so we really need to drill down, and that's one of the reasons that this podcast exists. I'm going to try to bring that forward to help expose that so that you can really see the benefits of eating appropriately and eating healthy, and not necessarily what the government says is healthy. Overweight and obesity is a major problem facing our society, personally, locally, nationally, and internationally. We have to start working toward a healthier version of ourselves. Let's take this information that we learned today and start to discuss and find ways, just a little at a time, to make each day a little better. What is your why? Why are you doing this? Are you doing this for grandkids? Are you doing this for your health? Are you doing this to travel? Are you doing this for your partner? What are you doing to make sure you're moving the needle just a little bit in the direction of better health? What does your 5-year-older version of yourself look like and feel like? And what would that person 5 years down the road tell that person today? I'm your host, Dr. Drew Crawford. Join me next week as we go beyond measurements and image and build a healthier lifestyle and elevate your well-being on the BMI Podcast. See you then. The BMI Podcast is provided for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute providing medical advice or professional services. Be sure to check out our description below for our website and social media platforms.